Good morning, everybody. I think it's already 4 minutes past, so we should not lose any time and we should start. I see there are quite people online. I know there's a lot in parallel this Thursday morning, so people are also still coming in the room. No problem for that. Don't hesitate, please. So we welcome to our intergroup session, which will have two main items this morning. First of all, the successful European Citizen Initiative, ECI Safe Cruelty Free Cosmetics, to commit to a Europe without animal testing will be the first item, with three presentations from experts. And during the second part of the meeting, we will hear about the current revision of the classification, labeling and packaging CLP regulation, and we will have a debate about it. So very interesting and very important topics. The ECI Safe Cruelty Free Cosmetic is the second successful ECI in 10 years, asking the Commission to phase out the use of animals in science, and more than 1 million European citizens have demanded an end to the harmful use of animals in cosmetic and other chemical tests, as well as an ambitious plan to bring all experiments on animals to an end. The organisers of this ECI will give us more insight today and will explain why there is still work to be done to strengthen the animal testing ban on cosmetics, why the chemical strategy for sustainability, the CSS, is putting millions of animals at risk, and why the current initiative in place to promote non-animal science are not delivering sustainable reductions to the number of animals used in science. So we need more initiative to promote non-animal science. We will hear from them possible solutions to these issues. They will present proposals for the legislative revision that are underway under the CSS, which can end all tests of animals for cosmetic ingredients and stop additional animal-based tests from being added to meet new regulatory requirements. They will also take us through some key elements for a roadmap which really needs to accelerate the transition to non-animal science. In addition, the European Parliament is currently analysing the proposal of the European Commission for the revision of the CLP, which I mentioned already. This revision provides a key opportunity to future-proof the regulation by embedding within CLP the possibility to adopt and adapt to fit-for-purpose non-animal approaches in a timely manner. However, the new hazard classes proposed are anticipated to lead to extensive increases in technically complex animal tests. Our speaker will put forward proposals really to avoid more animal testing under the CLP legislation. We are joined by Dr. Julia Baines, Science Policy Manager at PETA, who will speak about the European Citizens Initiative, Safe Cruelty-Free Cosmetics, and we are also joined by Dr. Donna Macmillan. She is Senior Strategist, Regulatory Science from the Human Society International, who will give us a presentation on transforming the EU chemicals regulation for better protection of animals, humans, and the environment. And then we have also Dr. Luisa Bastos, Animal and Science Program Leader from the Eurogroup for Animals, who will speak about the need of putting forward a concrete plan to transition to non-animal science. We will listen to their presentation and will then open the floor for questions and demands and also for debate as usual. And then we will also have Dr. Emma Grange, Director of Science and Regulation Affairs, Cruelty Free International, will give us a presentation on how to deliver better regulation with less animal tests and about the opportunities in the revision of the CLP, so the classification, labeling and packaging regulation. And also her presentation will be followed by Q&A. Dan, sorry. So some brief announcements as always. So an information I wanted to give on the oral question on prohibiting chick and duckling killing in the EU law. The Conference of the Presidents might decide today or during its next meetings whether to include this oral question on prohibiting chick and duckling killing in the EU law in the agenda of one of the upcoming plenary sessions. We would therefore call, please, on you to reach out to your group leaders to ask for a plenary debate as well as for resolution on this issue. Before I start the presentation, as always, I briefly highlight some practical aspects. You know that the meeting is live streamed on Interaxio. The meeting will be recorded, and the video recording and presentation will be uploaded to the Intergroup website afterwards. And interpretation, we will have it in English, French, German, Italian, and Polish. So now let's start with the first presentation. I will give the floor to Dr. Julia Baines, Science Policy Manager PETA, to speak about the need of protection and also strengthening the EU cosmetics animal testing ban. Dr. Baines, the floor is yours for 10 minutes. Good morning and welcome in our intergroup. I see you are there now. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me this morning. Can everyone see my PowerPoint presentation? I think it's just loading. Yes. Can we go to the first slide, please? Thank you. So I'm going to start with our presentation this morning to just give you a little bit of the background context and the story for how our ECI came to be. So as we've heard this morning, more than 1.2 million citizens have signed the End Animal Testing European Citizens Initiative. And so support for ending animal testing has never been clearer or so aligned. And this is why we feel that the ECI that we're discussing today is just so crucial. So our ECI stems from what happened back in October 2014, so a long time ago now. It was just 1 year after the full cosmetics animal testing and marketing bans came into effect that ECHA and the European Commission released a statement asserting that under certain circumstances, animals may still be used in cosmetics tests. Now, years of campaigning with letters, ombudsman cases, PQs, petitions, ECHA Board of Appeal cases, and various campaigns followed, but to little avail to solve this particular problem. So, discussing our next steps, myself and my colleague Emily McIver approached the main animal protection groups across Europe. So that was Cruelty Free Europe, the European Coalition to End Animal Experimentation, Eurogroup for Animals, and the Humane Society International Europe. And that was with the idea of starting an ECI. And together we realised that we could use an ECI to transform legislation for animals, not just in the realms of cosmetics, but across all scientific sectors. And our ECI then really is an opportunity to set out new and a better standard of scientific rigour. So as we can see on the screen, we aim to protect and strengthen the cosmetics animal testing ban, to transform EU chemicals regulation and to modernise science in the EU. So next slide please. So launched in August 2021 with the support of global cosmetics giants, The Body Shop and Dove, and the support of many other animal protection organisations, we sparked a movement with our campaign. Next slide, please. And we created headlines across Europe with the aim of initiating meaningful change for animals. So my colleagues and I will take you through exactly how we would like to see the Commission take action on each objective with your support. Next slide, please. So starting with cosmetics, we're calling on the European Commission to protect and strengthen the cosmetics animal testing ban. We're asking that legislative change be initiated to achieve consumer, worker and environmental protection for all cosmetics ingredients without testing on animals at any time. So it's widely accepted that animal testing for the purpose of obtaining toxicological information on a cosmetics ingredient was prohibited over a decade ago, and so it does come as an astonishment to many that ECHA has been ordering the destruction of literally thousands of animals. for that very same purpose. Furthermore, it's widely acknowledged that proposals under the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability pose further risk to increasing such tests. So, unsurprisingly, compliance with the testing ban is being questioned by citizens, cosmetics brands, and ingredient suppliers. And this very question is under examination currently within the EU Court of Justice. Now, absolutely no one is disputing the necessity to ensure protection of all humans, including workers and consumers, and this can and should be done without undermining the cosmetics animal testing ban. Next slide, please. So, in calling for animals to be truly animal test-free, we recommend that the safety assessment covering workers comes expressly under the scope of the cosmetics regulation. It must be clarified that human health endpoints are exclusively assessed using non-animal data, regardless of the purpose of testing. Furthermore, we recommend that the term human health in the regulation explicitly includes workers rather than making the false assumption that it does not. Our second recommendation is for environmental toxicity assessment of cosmetics ingredients to come under the scope of the cosmetics regulation. And this is what we mean by strengthening the ban. Currently, the regulation allows for environmental toxicity assessment to be achieved under the provisions of REACH, and in doing so allows for vertebrate animal testing. However, we have the opportunity now to future-proof the use of non-animal methods for cosmetic safety assessment for all toxicity endpoints. And this may be achieved via either a phase-in approach and incentivizing the development of further non-animal methods, or how we first suggest maximizing the use of currently available information, including exposure data, to better facilitate the use of relevant data types. Next point, please. Our third recommendation, we wish to ensure the protection of the cosmetics animal testing ban within the upcoming legislative changes in the context of the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. This involves ensuring that any proposed legislative revisions impacting the testing and the classification of cosmetic products are consistent with the testing ban. So I hope that you will join us in urging the Commission to prioritise the implementation and the development of non-animal methods for all toxicological endpoints, including those where further information is required, for example, endocrine disruption. Final point, please. Finally, the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety has long-standing valuable expertise in evaluating risk assessments that rely on non-animal methods, and this is to help ensure safe cosmetics enter the EU market. Upcoming legislative changes which could affect the SCCS must protect the committee's independence and innovative position. So we recommend to either keep the SCCS in its current position or to establish it as an independent risk assessment body under ECHA. This would ensure that any scientific evaluations related to the safety of cosmetic products are carried out without recourse to new animal tests. Next slide, please. So finally, the EU cosmetics testing ban has been recognised as the gold standard and incentive for transition and innovation without animals. Its progress should be continued to be leveraged to accelerate the complete replacement of all animal tests with more scientifically relevant and protective non-animal methods. Thank you very much for listening.
Many thanks to you, Julia, for this very informative presentation. And then we go immediately to the second presentation. I will give the floor to Dr. Donna Macmillan. As I said, she's Senior Strategist Regulatory Science from Human Society International, to speak about transforming the EU chemical regulation for better protection for animals, humans, and the environment. Dr. Macmillan, the floor is yours also for 10 minutes. Good morning and welcome in our interview. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me to speak today on the second objective of the ECI, transforming EU chemicals regulation for better protection of animals, humans and the environment. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin this section by giving a little bit of context around animal testing and chemicals regulations, focusing on the REACH regulation in particular. As I am sure you're aware, the European Commission have been working on a long-awaited revision to REACH, which is due to be published in Q4 of this year. However, the current proposals for the REACH revision will lead to a significant increase in animal testing. For example, a proposal to add standard information requirements to assess endocrine disruption has been calculated to use an additional 3.5 to 5 million animals. And the proposal to register polymers has been calculated to use an additional 1.6 million animals. This revision is also a continuation of a crude hazard-based approach which doesn't take exposure to chemicals into account, so the actual real-world risk isn't considered, and such an approach would be a better way to ensure the safety of human health and the environment. There's also no clear commitment to use non-animal methods, which are sometimes referred to as NAMs, which I may use during the rest of the presentation, and there are no concrete steps in place to modernise these regulations. Next slide, please. So moving on to the ECI. So as detailed in the annex to the ECI, we have outlined a 3-point minimum mandate relating to this second objective of transforming EU chemicals regulations. The first point is to put in place concrete steps. This means with dedicated resources, with meaningful timelines, and with cross-sectoral support enabled to develop and implement human and environmentally relevant non-animal approaches to identify these toxic chemicals. The second point is to ensure that the rapid uptake of non-animal methods is aligned between the European agencies. This includes those for chemicals, biocides, plant protection products, pharmaceuticals, as well as some others. The last point in this minimum mandate reiterates that we do not want to see a defaulting to the reliance on animal testing under European regulations as they stand or in the future. Next slide, please. So how can we achieve this minimum mandate? Our first recommendation is the creation of a scientific committee with significant expertise in these non-animal methods, NAMs. This committee would provide independent advice, as well as recommendations on suitable NAMs, as well as providing input into the reviews of current practice or regulatory revision. This would lead to increased compliance from registrants, leading to a decrease of the burden on the agency, and then of course a decrease in the number of animals used. Next slide, please. Our second recommendation is to increase the uptake and implementation of NAMs. The Commission has invested many millions of euros in funding for the development of technologically advanced non-animal methods, but this has not yet led to a material change in their acceptance by regulators. Part of this is down to the structure of regulations like REACH and CLP, which Emma will describe later in her presentation. And the first and arguably most crucial part of this recommendation is to ensure that the regulations are future-proofed. This includes adding flexible language that allows the use of scientifically valid NAMs when available to avoid the reopening of regulations in order for them to advance in the future. Another key part of this recommendation is to support a regular review of the availability, uptake, and implementation of these non-animal methods, which of course could be carried out by the scientific committee that I described in recommendation 1 on the previous slide. The third part of recommendation 2 is around ensuring that regulatory frameworks can be adapted to ensure the rapid uptake of NAMs. This can include a tiered testing strategy, which could be implemented under REACH in its current form, or a prioritisation approach, which could be implemented under a reformed REACH. And all of these can only be achieved by implementing clear milestones, clear goals, as well as key performance indicators. And this will be discussed a little bit more in the next section of the ECI with respect to the roadmap. Next slide, please. So to conclude, it's important to note that there are non-animal methods available or under development for all toxicity endpoints that require assessment under EU chemicals regulations. The only way to not default to animal models is to commit to a full transition away from animal testing by ensuring that no further new or expanded animal test-based data requirements are added to regulations. And by doing this, we will achieve a win for industry, a win for human health and environmental protection, and a win for animals used in these tests. And I hope that we have your support. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, dear Donna, for this very interesting presentation and really showing the concrete steps we need to do, the key elements that we need to achieve. So thank you very much for that. And then I will give now the floor to Dr. Luisa Bastos, Animal and Science Program Leader of the Eurogroup for Animals, to speak about putting forward a concrete plan to transition to non-animal science. So, dear Luisa, the floor is yours also for 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Tilly, and good morning, everyone. I would like to start by stating the obvious. Animal experimentation is causing harm to society and to animals. And you can help to change this by supporting, once again, a plan to transition to non-animal science. And when I talk about harms, I'm talking about harms to animals kept in laboratories, of course, but also harms to human and other animal patients who are still waiting for solutions for their conditions. I'm talking about harms to the environment, where we continue dumping dangerous chemicals, but also the harms to researchers and technicians that suffer from the emotional burden of inflicting harm to other sentient beings. It's an endless cycle. And it is to address those harms that we're here asking for your support to the third objective of this ECI, which asks for a concrete plan to transition to non-animal science. More specifically, this ECI asks that before the end of this current legislative term, the Commission commits to a legislative proposal plotting a roadmap to phase out animal experiments in the EU. And this objective is not strange to you. In 2021, members of this intergroup led the way to a resolution on plans and actions to accelerate the transition to innovation without the use of animals. This resolution already asked the Commission to put forward an action plan to achieve the final goal of the EU of fully replacing the use of animals in research, in regulatory testing, and in education. Now 1.2 million EU citizens have joined the 95% of members of this House and many scientists in supporting this EU-wide plan. The question is, how can we get there? Researchers make choices based on the incentives they have. This is how governments steer and shape science in the EU. And EU researchers using animals believe that innovation can lead to breakthrough solutions. But they fear that by using new research models, they may face difficulties in publishing their research and threaten their access to funds. Sometimes, research incentives are turned upside down. I come from a research institute where scientists were asked to turn towards animal experiments to be able to publish in higher impact journals and in turn get access to EU grants. In simpler terms, we were asked to perform experiments on animals to be able to survive as scientists. So what can be the win-win-win scenario for science, society, and animals? We are putting forward 6 basic recommendations for a EU roadmap to transition to non-animal science. And these elements that will follow are not new in the EU. All these elements have been adopted or implemented in other priority areas in some way. The first one is EU-wide collaboration and coordination. There is a need to coordinate actions across DGs and agencies that are responsible for aspects of research, regulatory testing, education, and funding, involving all member states to achieve a strategic focus on the final goal. Because currently, member states and the Commission have in place actions to promote non-animal science, but there are still no concrete goals or coordinated plans, which makes change difficult. And the roadmap needs clear milestones to focus minds and drive activities towards the desired goal. And milestones in this area can be linked to the goals of renewing EU research infrastructure or reviewing curricula in life sciences, for example. But besides milestones, it's important to identify key research areas to help analyze the continued use of animals in these areas and look at how to replace them together with all stakeholders and the member states. There is also a need to assess and expand key infrastructure to allow a fuller exploitation of non-animal methods. And by establishing milestones, identifying key areas of concern and infrastructure needs will help to define an appropriate level of funding to support the replacement of animals in concrete areas. And finally, a very important aspect of this transition that also echoes the calls of this Parliament is education and training. Because researchers, educators, students, regulators, they all need support to change working practices and to acquire and have the knowledge and skills to embrace the new methods. Researchers are driven to help find solutions to societal problems, but they are still lacking appropriate and sufficient incentives. And this Parliament can help researchers to deliver better and humane science by reiterating its support to a concrete EU-wide plan to accelerate, step by step, the transition to non-animal science. And next month, we are expecting a hearing in this Parliament on this ECI. Your support will be crucial to ask the Commission to commit to a legislative proposal plotting a roadmap to phase out experiments in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa, for the concrete steps, again, we need to do, for the recommendations very clearly, and also for your call to all the members to be there when the hearing, to now speak with your colleagues that we push for this concrete roadmap in order to have, I really like, it was also said before, that we have this win-win-win situation for a better and more human science, as you said. So thank you very much, and I know how committed you are also to this topic for years already. But now I open the floor to my colleagues or to anybody who wants to intervene, who has a question. Please don't hesitate. I'm also looking online, quite some people, more than 40, also following us online. Are there questions? Are there remarks that you like to make? Please don't hesitate. I have also, yeah, go ahead, please.
Ok, grazie Presidente. Volevo fare una domanda.
Thank you.
Grazie Presidente.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question on that last point that was dealt with. A question about education and training when it comes to scientists and researchers, teaching them about methods that don't use animals. And so my question to you, Madam, is do you think that we can push for pilot projects to be created or for ad hoc funds to be set up for that kind of training? At the moment, as far as I understand it, is that despite the fact that we've got budget set aside for research, there are no projects which are specifically targeting exactly that kind of training and research, at least as far as I know. So I was wondering whether you thought there'd be something that could be done to introduce instruments or pilot projects that would target budget specifically onto that topic. Thank you.
Yes, Louisa.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Very important and very interesting that you mentioned pilot projects in particular. Indeed, there's a lot that can be done, and the Commission has a lot of experience in working in a coordinative way with member states to align educational systems in the EU. On research and research on animals in particular, there has been a pilot project in place, and the projects from the Commission under that pilot project are still running. The initiatives there were mainly invested on education and training on the 3 Rs, so looking at how to use animals in research, applying the principles of refinement and reduction, and also replacement. There are some modules on non-animal approaches. More of that would help, focused on the replacement of animals, would help greatly to advance this area and to reach out to scientists, students, and educators to understand better how they can approach or move towards non-animal approaches. Indeed, yes. So the pilot project is one of the mechanisms that can be used. But under the European education area, for example, where there are already priorities regarding elements where the EU agrees that needs to be a harmonization. There is an initiative also on digital education. It would be interesting to explore under that system how we could integrate also the transition to non-animal science as a priority.
Yes, indeed, because training and education is, of course, key. Mandela was already saying it, the strongest weapon that we have is education. I cannot repeat it enough, and there it starts. So your question is very good, how we can really indeed foster more the training, education also for future researchers in order to go that way. But I was looking at one moment the percentage regarding Horizon, so the European research program dedicated to non-animal testing, validation, etc., and it's very, very low, the percentage which is going into that direction. So that is another instrument completely. We should push more for research programs going in that direction, of course. Any other remarks or question? Don't hesitate if you are a member of the parliament, but also if you are advisor or, yeah, Niels Fulson.
Yes, please. Thank you. I would like to ask you, what do you think is the timeline if we are ambitious for phasing out completely all animal testing in these areas that you are referring to? I mean, you talked milestones, and I think that is useful. How do you look at the specific timeline for phasing out? Thank you.
That's a $1 million question. It will depend who you ask. I think that the main focus here is on the acceleration. So right now, with what we are doing, it may take 100 years, maybe more, to get there. Once we have a strategy in place where we have concrete focus to replace the use of animals in concrete areas, like, for example, an area that uses few animals compared to other animals, to other areas, is education and training. There are still animals being used for the purpose of education and training in the EU. If we focus on a target on that area to analyze where it's being used, why, and how we can get alternatives in those places to replace the use of animals, we could do a transition in just a few years, probably. But it really depends on the level of investment. So what we are trying to achieve with this strategy is to reduce to half the number of years that it will take us to phase out the use of animal in experiments. And then, of course, there is the issue of where is the limit of these replacements. Are we talking about any uses of animals? Are we talking about ending also the use of animals for wildlife research and populations? Are we talking about the difference in methods and the suffering of animals and just ending experiments that cause suffering to animals? And so I think that this is a wide debate that really needs to involve all stakeholders to reach a consensus on how to move forward.
You know what I would like to answer on that? It's really, we should, as long as it is really not a priority, not a political priority, and if you don't have brave and coherent politicians, we will know that, what did you say at the beginning? It will last, it would still continue 100 years. So I would like all the members of this intergroup to have more power, because I know if you would be in power, then we would have an acceleration, because you would make it as a priority, knowing that 92% of the animal testing is even not transferable to humans, as I also always say. We are not 70 or 80 kilos rats. We are a little bit more complicated. And then, as far as I remember, more than 70% of animal testing is used in fundamental research. So you mentioned training, etc., and how we work with students. There is really a lot of room, a lot of space that we could replace that. I think it's only around 18% which is used in regulatory purposes. So, and there we have more efficient solutions. So for me, it's really making it a political priority, let's be honest. We need people that have the courage, the braveness to do that, to make it, to break the transitions about animal testing. That's what we need. We need more members in this intergroup and really brave politicians to do it. And then we could really accelerate. So, other questions or reactions? Also online, please don't hesitate.
Thank you. Just thinking about when you set an ambitious target, an overall timeline for phase out, it's so important to make sure those milestones are in place on the way. Because imagine if we said, okay, let's choose 20 years or 30 years to phase out all testing for chemicals. There's work to do between now and that 30-year endpoint. And if we don't make the progress and hit defined milestones on the way, even 30 years won't be achievable. So it's, you know, there's a whole roadmap that we need to identify and plot those milestones on the way. Otherwise, progress could go much too slow. And even a very generous timeline, such as 50 years or 60 years, maybe that won't even be achieved. So as to just to highlight that.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Marketa from the office of Mr. Hoysik. I would like to have a question on the panelist from Cruelty Free. In the presentation, the recommendation, it was said that no new requirements should be added, that requires animal testing in the upcoming chemical legislation changes. And the question that I have on all the speakers, then how can we then get reliable data for the endocrine disrupting properties without undermining the ultimate or compromising safety? Because I think that everybody here agrees that ultimately endocrine disruptors equally harm animals as humans and white wildlife. Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yes, we certainly recognise and support the importance of identifying harmful substances in our environment, and that includes those substances that cause endocrine disruption. And I would emphasise that today we do have non-animal methods that generate information on endocrine disruption properties, and we're facing the potential likely introduction of animal testing methods to generate data on endocrine disruption, but with really very little scrutiny on the quality of the data that the animal test methods provide, and really we're missing a balanced and fair evaluation of the different types of data that different methods can provide. I don't know if maybe my colleagues online would like to explain a bit more on the way that we can generate information on endocrine disruption using non-animal methods, but I would highlight that today, even for cosmetics, for example, we can identify substances that have endocrine disrupting properties, and we are able to protect using non-animal methods. Thank you.
Yeah. We are always so severe regarding validation of of the NAMs. I would like that we are also so severe regarding animal testing. How valid are certain animal tests? That is the question. Don't misunderstand me. I know that we are not going to succeed to end animal testing tomorrow. We need clear targets. We need to prioritize. But in certain points, we are also stuck keeping on with this animal testing. We could advance much faster, much efficienter without animal testing. But I give the floor to an expert here, Dr. Macmillan Donna. Please, you have the floor also to react, please.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. Yes, thank you for that question. And just to build upon what has just been said about making sure that we treat animal tests, or we at least consider the validity of animal tests to the same extent that we assess the validity of non-animal methods, I think it's important to take a step back and look at existing analysis on the in vivo tests that are available for endocrine disruption and which have already been proposed to be added into the upcoming REACH revision. So there are several studies that have been developed in the past few years that have actually compared the in vivo data, so the Hirschberger and the heterotrophic assay. But what these studies have shown is that these assays suffer from quite poor reproducibility. So when you use the same assay on the same substance but in different studies, it only provides the same result 70% of the time. So there's a lot of uncertainty there with that animal test data, and possibly more uncertainty than what would be what we would get from non-animal methods. The non-animal methods, the in vitro tests that have been proposed to be added to REACH, although these all cover specific modes of action that are endocrine specific, they're not necessarily related to a downstream effect for human health or the environment. And what we have proposed, or what we have provided in comments with respect to the REACH revision, is that these in vitro assays are used together in a battery. So one would not be a standalone flag to lead to an in vivo test, and instead combine the assays in a way that provides a very robust and reliable prediction of endocrine disruption that would impact human health and the environment. There are examples by the EPA of ways to combine these batteries. I think they use it more for a prioritisation approach, and there are definitely ways that we can learn from the scientific publications that have focused on these non-animal methods to ensure that when we do need to add new hazard requirements like endocrine disruption, we can assess it reliably using in vitro assays. I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you very much. I will shortly give the floor to Louisa and then to the member of the European Parliament, Petras, also, please.
Thank you. Just to, it's really just to wrap up what my colleague said. It's really about changing the way we're thinking about finding solutions. Every time we have new endpoints to test the safety of chemicals or new types of substances, you directly go to new animal tests that are based on the ones that we have been using for so many decades already, because it's something that we know. But if we are serious about this transition and facing also the problems that arise with the current system, we need to change the way we are thinking. If we identify a problem, we need to find solutions to face those problems. And the first step is to look at what kind of tools, what kind of methodologies will we need to develop to address that concrete new problem. And that's...
Thank you, Louisa. I will give the floor to Petras if you would like to intervene, please.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. While supporting this initiative and enforcement of this decision wholeheartedly, no doubt about this, let me to understand better where we stand globally on this issue. Because, I mean, many products are on free trade regimes. I mean, they cross borders. I mean, they come to the European Union and so on and so forth. Should we think about introducing kind of labeling or identifying those documents, providing full information to consumers who buy those products, that those products being tested on animals or using animals. Probably it might be a kind of, you know, a measure which might be very powerful among consumers and would push producers, I mean, to think not just twice, many times before they come on the market. So in this regard, looking at the other countries like US, more developed countries, are they in line with us where we are, I mean, globally speaking, with this initiative? Thank you.
Yes, just very shortly, I with encounters with the cosmetic industry, they don't want to go back. They say, please, we don't want to do testing anymore because the consumers buy better and more if there is no animal testing on it, and if we can properly and honestly say that. But I let you also. Yeah.
Thank you. My mind goes straight to cosmetics as well. You may be aware that there are accreditation standards available for cosmetics and also household products, cruelty-free. Have the Leaping Bunny, for example. There are other accreditation systems to provide that transparency and information to consumers, because we know that consumers want to have informed choices to choose products that have not had testing on animals. So we know that potential is there. I would be delighted to see that kind of approach being taken to any consumer product, because animal testing isn't only restricted, of course, to a narrow range of products. It's almost any product you can buy may be related in one way or another to testing that has happened. I think really the point is about transparency. And there's a lot of movement in Europe in particular about transparency, in particular relating to foods, for example. And for me, transparency includes people understanding how the safety of products, of foods, of anything has been established. And when that safety has been evaluated on the basis of animal tests, which have problems associated with them, Donna already mentioned about the problems that some animal tests can have. I think we really need to be fully open about what's going on and what the issues actually are. And I think, by and large, the general population don't fully appreciate the not very solid foundation that animal testing provides when you evaluate the safety of chemical substances. Thank you.
Yes, I have Louisa. You want to say something quickly? And then I have also Dr. Julia Baines, and again Dr. Macmillan, and then I have also Francisco wants to say something. Please.
Yes, I would just like to emphasize the importance of the international collaboration that the EU also plays a very big role, and harmonization also. So it's very important, the transparency that Emma was talking about, to go line in line with the EU being a leader, worldwide leader, in pushing towards this world transition to non-animal science, because science is it's global. It's very difficult for one country, and some have tried and know that to transition to non-animal science by themselves. The EU needs also to play that role to transition worldwide, as it did with the cosmetics, and we continue to see a lot of advancements there.
Dr. Julia Baines, please. Julia?
In terms of where are we at globally, because if we were to take cosmetics, as Emma did earlier as the example, millions of animals are estimated to still be used in cosmetics tests globally, and we know that much of that testing happens in China. So what can we do to try and solve this problem? Well, there's already companies that are initiating exchange programs, for example, with Chinese scientists, showing them how to use non-animal methods in safety assessments and how to to use the data that's generated from the tests that are used. And it really is about showing the way. And so when we have the EU's very own cosmetics regulation actually appears to have taken a step backwards and is being undermined, we're actually seeing that other areas are now following that very same lead, and it's a shameful situation to be in. We see it in Australia, for example. They initiated an animal testing ban, but it contains loopholes. And so if we are to set that gold standard that we thought we had in 2013, when the champagne bottles were popping away and we were celebrating, to find out 1 year later, actually, no, hang on a minute, these tests are still happening. We know we can make some very key, very small legislative changes to close these loopholes. We can show the way forward, and that is what we need to do really urgently. And likewise, we are already seeing more generally across the scientific spectrum, not just in cosmetics, that action plans are being developed. There's individual companies that are developing their own action plans. This needs to be done at a member state level, at a European level, and we're seeing it in other areas, like certain agencies in the US, for example. So if we don't start really getting our acts together, Europe's going to be left behind, and that really would be a shame, because we have some excellent policy makers, some excellent university academic researchers, so we know we can do it, and we know that we can show the way. We just really do, as Tilly said earlier, we need that will. We need to get up and initiate this action, and that's why a roadmap is just so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent policy maker, but most of all, we have also in the European institution excellent research work on alternative methods, and the ACFAM and the Joint Research Centre European Institute. So we should also be coherent and more promote the work they are doing. Dr. Macmillan Donna.
Thank you. So just to follow on from Julia's point about the EU potentially being left behind, but I'll talk about chemicals regulations rather than cosmetics. We can learn a lot from other areas of the world who have implemented extremely ambitious targets and really high-level commitments from their governments to phase out animal testing for chemical safety assessment by specific dates. For example, the EPA said that they wanted to phase out animal testing for chemical safety by 2035, which was also promised by the Canadian government. There's also been promises from South Korea. Their Ministry of Environment has a really ambitious goal whereby they want more than 60% of the data that they use for chemical assessment to be based on non-animal methods by 2030. Now that's only 7 years away, and that's a very, very ambitious goal. And we know that the EU has the expertise and has the investment that's been made into non-animal methods, that the EU could make similar promises. Thank you.
Yes, as you both are mentioning, it's really also geopolitically that Europe is not lacking really behind. Francisco, you have the floor if you want.
Yeah, sorry, I cannot heard all the presentations because I have an intervention on climate. But I was expecting to hear if there is an analysis on an overall global basis of the economic impact of making this shift, because as every industry, I would assume that you have some industries that benefit from this. If I produce mice to this kind of industries, I would be against any type of change, obviously. But if if you have, or it has been made analysis, economical analysis of what can be made and gained through the diminishing of wastes, the quantity of resources that we can allocate to other sectors, the shift of some industries to others, if there's any data that could help us also debate this at the economic level, that we know that some groups are always talking about the economic benefits. And so if we had this assessment, it would be interesting.
Yes, who wants to react? Let's be also economically realistic. Yeah, what is Louisa?
Shortly, I don't know of such an analysis, and that would be very, very helpful. But we can look at transitions that had been made and that are being made in other areas to take lessons on how to support industries also to shift to non-animal approaches. Of course, and you see that very, very clearly already, the reactions of the ones that are, whose businesses are based on some elements of animal testing that find it difficult to visualize how to survive if we are going to transition. So I think that analysis will definitely be very helpful to also take the appropriate steps to support the economy as we move forward. But I can't give more details if you want to.
Thank you. There's different aspects to consider if you were to perform that kind of analysis. Of course, there are businesses that supply the animals and the businesses that perform those tests on animals, and of course they're not going to be very enthusiastic about the prospect of phasing out that activity. But of course, in their place, there will be businesses that provide the non-animal methods, and this is a really strong growth area. And also, we should consider the point of view of the chemicals manufacturing industry. Currently, when they need to provide data to meet regulatory requirements that depends on animal testing, some of those tests can take 2 years or more and cost millions of euros to complete that test. And even then, the data may be questionable, and even more tests are needed to clarify the data that was produced in the first instance. So it's an extremely expensive undertaking, and non-animal methods have the potential to provide more expansive data across many more substances much more quickly and much more cheaply. So it's not easy to bring everything together in an analysis, but I really think we must appreciate how beneficial the use of widespread use of non-animal testing methods could be if we really fully harness that opportunity.
That is exactly what I wanted to say. I read recently you would save a lot of time indeed without using animal testing. And as we know, time is money, so you could put products on the market much earlier without the use of animal testing and have more efficient results in certain cases. So, yes. So thank you for that. I don't see to those topics anymore, no more hand raised. Oh, yes, please.
Ecco, adesso. Volevo fare giusto un commento.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment on that last point, if I could. It reminds me of a discussion we had in this intergroup quite a few years ago now on the discussion on eggs, talking about changing egg packaging and working out whether it should say that they were barn eggs or free-range eggs, or what exactly the term should be used. And I remember there was a huge fight from the producers' organisations talking about the nature of changes it would require to their businesses. Now, we had a discussion within Europe. We made a decision. That decision then went down to the manufacturers. They changed their behaviour, and egg consumers nowadays know if their eggs are barn eggs or free-range eggs or whatever it is, and we've seen an increase in the purchase of free-range eggs. So the reason I'm giving this as an example is because we just need to make a decision. If at European level we decide that at least part of the ingredients in cosmetics have to, as an obligation, not be tested on animals, then that's what will happen. And if we introduce an obligation, at least for cosmetics, we start saying that there's an obligation that the ingredients should not be tested on animals, then the business plans of those companies will have to change, and new companies will come about as well in Europe. New companies that are going to be incredibly competitive throughout the world, and the rest of the countries in the world will catch up, and they'll also have to adapt to the new business plan.
So, I mean, regarding cosmetics, just to say that since 2013, we have a general ban on testing ingredients of cosmetics on animals. But then ECHA came, as we said, you all know this incoherence. Then ECHA says, yeah, but the workers manipulating these ingredients, there we have again to make. So it's also for me fighting this incoherence that we have sometimes. We cannot have on the one. It's also about our credibility. We cannot have, on the other hand, a general ban, and this was the third legislative measure that was taken already in 2013, and then on the other hand, still doing it. I mean, we lose all credibility. So regarding now speaking about cosmetic, and there exactly what happened is exactly what you were saying. The industry, for them, the rules at one moment were clear, and then they were not so clear. That's why we started this ECI, or it was very good that Cruelty Free did then this ECI in order that we maintain this ban. But the industry indeed is very creative, and then we push, of course, those NAMs, new approaches of methodologies. But we need also coherence in what we are doing on the European level. But I see the time running. I should shut up and give the floor definitely to Dr. Emma Grange, Director of Science and Regulatory Affairs, Cruelty Free International, to speak about delivering a better regulation with less animal tests and the related opportunities in the revision of the, what Petras was also mentioning, of the revision of the classification, labeling and packaging regulation. You have the floor for 10-15 minutes so that we have a little bit time left for questions, please.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you for welcoming us here today. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to focus in on the CLP regulation. Now, that the CLP revision is a concrete example of a very urgent issue that our groups are collaborating on and which could be addressed under the objectives of the ECI. And we recognise that the classification of chemicals, that is, the describing of their hazardous properties, it is a really key feature of the way that the risks associated with chemical substances are managed in Europe. Next slide, please. The CLP regulation, it lays out how information on chemicals can be used to perform that classification. And it's really a key component of the European Chemicals Management Regulatory Framework. But today, the CLP regulation, it only explicitly describes how to classify substance hazards on the basis of animal test data, even though we do already have well-advanced and mature non-animal methods for a range of hazard classes. This is a legacy of historical exclusive reliance on animal testing for generating new data. But we have already moved on, and CLP is not up to date. So as you are all very aware, I'm sure, the CLP regulation is in the process of being amended, in part via a delegated act and in part via the ordinary legislative procedure. And we 5 animal NGOs that you can see represented on this slide, we're working together to think about how the revision of CLP can be an opportunity to help ensure that this regulation is aligned with the transition away from animal testing. And at this point, actually, I would like to acknowledge and thank MEP Spiraki. Various lines of text included in her draft report do align with what we would like to see. So we do feel very encouraged. Next slide. Now, on this first bullet point here, the European Union's goal of fully replacing animal testing is articulated in recital 33 of the Commission's legislative proposal to amend CLP. And we feel that should be reflected and reinforced in Article 1 of CLP itself to really help translate aspiration into action and accountability. Now, this goal must be positioned as an overarching priority that gives downstream activity governed by this regulation and guides that activity, including decisions to introduce new hazard classes and classification criteria that are described within those classes. This goal should also guide the review and revision of existing classes and criteria. Now, our views here are consistent with the Commission's own vision that implementation of the CLP regulation should be based on the use of alternative methods. The Commission's legislative proposal states that under the CLP regulation, the decision to classify a substance or a mixture for environmental or human health hazards is exclusively based on existing information. However, the language currently of Article 7 of CLP clearly does allow for new animal testing to be performed. We want to get to the point where it can be made clear that tests on animals must not be performed for the purposes of the CLP regulation. It's really vital that the CLP regulation is future-proofed as far as is possible today through the use of appropriately flexible language, and is also able to evolve alongside other chemicals regulations such as REACH as they also evolve. In that way, we can progress as per the roadmap for transitioning away from animal testing that we heard about already, and make sure that that progress is not blocked. Now, this evolution will be stimulated by a fair evaluation of the different types of information that may be used to classify chemicals as hazardous, and we already touched on this point in the discussion earlier. And it does continue to be the case that non-animal data are held to a much more stringent standard than animal data, which leads to a lower level of use and acceptance of non-animal methods for generating information on chemical substances. And as noted by several regulators and many experts in the field, the robustness of any testing strategy should be assessed according to its biological relevance, its technical characterization, data integrity and transparency, and with independent review. And that approach is what will help us move beyond only comparing the data generated by non-animal test methods with that from traditional test methods when we evaluate new approaches. And that's how we will get to the general information that leads to protective regulatory decisions. I'd just like to highlight it's worth really pointing out that the CLP regulation does not itself legally require new testing, including on animals, for human health or the environment to be performed. Instead, CLP instructs on how existing information is to be used. And we think it's so important here to have absolute clarity on that point, so that there is legal certainty for registrants on what their obligations are and what is prohibited, for example, as is set out by the Cosmetics Product Regulation. And we really hope that the CLP revision will ensure that cosmetics ingredients are not indirectly subject to new testing on animals for the purposes of classification. And we note the intention of the revision proposal for CLP is that only existing data would be used, and while we do welcome and support that, we would prefer to see new animal testing for the purposes of CLP to be explicitly prohibited. It's especially important that the cosmetics testing ban is protected. Now, moving on to the second bullet point there, to ensure alignment with the Union's goal of fully replacing animal testing, there needs to be active promotion of the uptake of non-animal approaches at the level of the United Nations. It's also necessary that the CLP regulation is kept up to date with criteria already in place at the level of the UN, and that provide for the use of non-animal data for classification already today. So the UN Global Harmonised System now already describes how we can use non-animal data to classify substances for skin hazards, eye hazards, and skin sensitization hazards, and yet CLP does not do that. The EU has already demonstrated that it's ready to be agile through its introduction of new hazard classes and criteria into the CLP regulation ahead of the United Nations process. So it's clear that EU regulations should be kept up to date in the area of non-animal approaches. So this is my last slide. We feel the Commission must make timely and appropriate decisions to amend CLP. It's so important that it doesn't lag behind the state of the art of the use of non-animal methods, which it already is. Such decisions to amend CLP should be well informed regarding the state of the art of use of non-animal data and approaches. And as I mentioned, we know that's not the case, but to be well informed, we need a review. We need a frequent and full review of how non-animal data can be generated today and how we can use that data to make protective regulatory decisions. We must account for the latest international developments, and as I mentioned already, we have to have a fair evaluation as well as the animal test data so that we know that we are actually providing protection that is as good or better than what we already have. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And again, I open the floor if there are reactions, remarks, and Anja Hazekamp, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Tilly. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned in your presentation that the CLP must evolve alongside the other chemicals regulations. And well, we know that the proposal for REACH probably will be delayed again. Can you explain what the consequences of this delay of REACH might have on the CLP? Will there be a gap or something like that in the field of new approach methodologies here?
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum because CLP sets that framework for how data that is generated according to legal requirements placed elsewhere, such as in REACH, and how that data can then be used. And it's absolutely right that because CLP has been amended first, without the information requirements being fixed into CLP yet, we could block the use of the fullest possible use of non-animal test methods to generate data under REACH if the language within CLP today is not sufficiently flexible. And keeping the two aligned is so important. And I mentioned the evolution, and it's why I really would like to see mechanisms embedded within CLP as well as in REACH so that they two are always considered together and they both evolve at the same time. Because we can talk about REACH and people will say, well, what about CLP? We can talk about CLP, people say, well, what about REACH? And I think, especially for the discussion with endocrine disruptors, we're seeing they're discussed and tackled together more than we have seen previously. It's almost quite an artificial distinction between the two because of how closely related they are. We need to understand not just what kind of new non-animal methods that we need to satisfy what's needed under REACH, but how it can be used under CLP, but also how to make better use of the data that we can even have today. And if you don't look at REACH and CLP at the same time, we won't make the progress. So yeah, in a way, I would wish that we could have looked at REACH first and set CLP after, but that's not the reality. But we must think about both at the same time.
Thank you very much for this question and also for the answer. Please, let's do not go again into another incoherence that is already announced. Chronique d'une mort annoncée. So yes. So I hope a lot of the people in the intergroup, by the way, will be responsible for those files, for REACH, for the CLP, for CSS is already distributed also, and also partly for the other files. But it's important, at least if you are not in charge of the file, that we work closely together with our colleagues working on that file. Is there any other remark, question you would like to make? Please don't hesitate, members of the Parliament, but also advisors or specialists or experts. I don't see anybody online. Then, thank you very much again to all those experts, to Dr. Julia Baines, to Dr. Donna Macmillan, to Dr. Louisa Bastos, and to Dr. Emma Grange. So very female experts on non-animal testing we had today. I'm very happy about that. It was very, very interesting. So thank you very much. And don't forget about the Parliament's hearing on the ECI is currently scheduled for the 25th of May, so cruelty-free science. And I hope we will all encourage our colleagues to attend to hear more about this very important initiative. So it's still to be confirmed, I say that, but that's what we hope should be scheduled around that date. It has been especially helpful today to hear how really concretely the transition to animal-free testing and research will benefit people and the environment, and well, of course, of the animals. I also really like, Louisa, when you said all the harm animal testing is doing, of course, to millions of animals, but also to a lot of humans. And you really had this holistic approach of all the harm that is being done by animal testing and also the inefficiency we mentioned often. So, often the objectives of the protection of health and protecting animals used in science are framed as though we can have one or the other, but not both. Rapid growth in advanced technologies, however, able to replace animal used in testing and research mean that there is no conflict between people protecting animals and people that protect the environment or human health. So, working towards the transition will benefit really all of us and the environment. So I would like to thank again the speakers for making this very, very clear today and to challenge really the European Commission to more transparently address limitations associated with animal use so that we can hold a truly informed debate and so that we can all see exactly how urgent this transition has become, and also to work with the different stakeholders Francisco mentioned this morning. Yes, of course, we have also to speak with the people that live from animal testing or selling animals. We have to take all the stakeholders on board and to look together to really have this concrete roadmap to succeed this transition to non-animal testing. What about the next session? So the next session will take place on the 11th of May. Please note already in your agenda at 10 o'clock to 11:30. We'll have again 1.5 hours, and it will have 2 items of discussion. The first one is one we discuss quite at the moment also. We'll address the Mercosur free trade agreement, so Mercosur, and the European Parliament's mobilization has so far been essential to postpone the signature of this free trade agreement, and further opposition will be needed. Also in this perspective of animal welfare, because this free trade agreement has come back in the EU trade policy agenda, and there is a need to discuss about it again, also, as I said, regarding animal welfare. And the second item, which is linked to Mercosur, will be a panel discussion with experts about the importance of biodiversity and wildlife conservation in the Amazonia, the Pantanal and other biomass in Brazil. So my colleague Francisco Guerreiro will moderate this debate, and there we have also somebody coming from Brazil, Ciro Gomes, a well-known Brazilian politician, as well as Luciana Leite, a biodiversity and climate campaigner at the Environmental Justice Foundation, will join us to debate, and other panelists might still be added. So I'm really looking forward also to this session that we will have on the 11th of May. Thank you very much. And for once, I'm happy for the interpreters, because for once I'm in advance in time of 2 minutes, and it's the best I could do today. But thank you very much to the interpreters who are often give us some minutes more. So thank you very much for your very important work you are doing there. Thank you. And all the best to all of you. Good votes for those who are voting, and take care. All the best. See you.